In the early months of 1942, the Arctic supply route had become one of the most strategically significant and perilous maritime corridors of the Second World War. The Allied effort to sustain the Soviet Union, embroiled in a brutal conflict on the Eastern Front, required the continuous delivery of war material through the ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. These convoys traversed the Barents and Norwegian seas, confronting extreme weather, ice-infested waters, and relentless threats from the German Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe. The Arctic, with its near-permanent winter darkness and treacherous conditions, presented challenges that rivaled any enemy action. The British Admiralty, aware of the political and military imperative to supply the Red Army, had established a structured convoy system by late 1941. Each convoy was organized under the coordination of the Operational Intelligence Center, OIC, in London, which monitored German naval movements, Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, and U-boat deployments. By mid-1942, the convoy program had successfully transported substantial quantities of tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and raw materials to the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, losses remained significant, and every voyage carried the risk of annihilation. It was in this context that Convoy PQ-17 was conceived. The convoy, scheduled to depart in late June 1942, would be one of the largest Arctic convoys to date. The total complement consisted of 35 merchant vessels, hailing from Britain, the United States, and Allied nations. The cargo included 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 motor vehicles, and 156,000 tons of various supplies, ranging from ammunition and explosives to food and aluminum for Soviet war production. Commodore John Dowding, a veteran officer of the Royal Navy Reserve, was appointed as the convoy commodore. His orders were to maintain strict formation discipline while ensuring maximum protection against the expected concentration of German forces. The naval escort of PQ-17 was arranged in 3 distinct layers. The close escort, commanded by Captain Jack Broom aboard the destroyer HMS Keppel, consisted of 6 destroyers, 4 Flower-class corvettes, and additional armed trawlers. The cruiser covering force, under Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton, included the heavy cruisers HMS London and HMS Norfolk, supported by 2 destroyers. Beyond these forces, operating further west, the distant covering force was positioned under Admiral Sir John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet. Tovey's force was composed of the battleships HMS Duke of York and HMS Anson, the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, and an accompanying screen of destroyers. This layered defensive strategy aimed to deter surface attacks, counter U-boat threats, and provide anti-aircraft protection where feasible. Intelligence reports indicated a significant German presence in northern Norway. The battleship Tirpitz, stationed in the Altafjord near Narvik, represented the most acute threat. This 52,600-ton vessel, armed with 8 15-inch guns and capable of speeds exceeding 30 knots, had the potential to destroy the convoy if it left port. The Germans also maintained 2 heavy cruisers, Admiral Hipper and Admiral Scheer, in nearby fjords, along with numerous U-boats of the 8th and 9th flotillas positioned along the convoy's route. Luftwaffe aircraft from Fliegerkorps V, stationed at Banak and Bardufoss, were tasked with reconnaissance and attack duties. The Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, leveraging decrypted Enigma messages and reconnaissance flights, continuously assessed the likelihood of German sorties. Reports indicated preparations at Alten Fjord and the port of Trondheim, suggesting possible deployment of heavy units against PQ-17. While the intelligence was incomplete, it generated extreme caution within the Admiralty and heightened the urgency of convoy protection measures. PQ-17 departed from Hvalfjord, Iceland, on June 27, 1942, forming a diamond-shaped formation designed to optimize visual coverage and mutual defense. The Arctic summer provided extended daylight, which, while advantageous for navigation, increased the risk of detection by German reconnaissance aircraft. Within days, the convoy was sighted by a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor from Camp Jeschwader 40, which transmitted location and heading information back to the Kriegsmarine. The U-boat network, guided by these reports, began repositioning for interception. Luftwaffe 5 prepared Heinkel He-111 and Junkers Ju-88 aircraft for torpedo bombing missions. The first engagement occurred on July 2, 1942, when Luftwaffe aircraft attacked the convoy near the Arctic Circle. Anti-aircraft fire from the close escorts damaged several attackers, but SS Christopher Newport was torpedoed and later scuttled after the crew was rescued. Despite the limited scale, these initial encounters highlighted the vulnerability of the merchant ships once outside the protective formation. As the convoy progressed eastward, encrypted signals between London and the escort commanders intensified. The Admiralty's decrypted reports suggested that Tirpitz had left port and was proceeding toward the convoy. In reality, Tirpitz had only conducted preliminary maneuvers, but the partial intelligence led to the perception of an imminent threat. On July 4, 1942, 2100 hours Greenwich Mean Time, the Admiralty issued a decisive signal ordering the cruiser covering force to withdraw westward and, shortly thereafter, commanded Commodore Dowding to scatter the convoy. This instruction, transmitted under the assumption of immediate danger from German heavy units, dismantled the defensive formation. Ships were instructed to sail independently toward Murmansk or Arkhangelsk, effectively rendering them isolated targets. Anti-aircraft protection was limited to individual ship batteries, which were insufficient against coordinated aerial and submarine attacks. From 5 to July 10, scattered ships were systematically engaged. The U-boat U-88 sank SS Daniel Morgan, while Luftwaffe torpedo bombers attacked SS John Witherspoon and SS Empire Byron. The British HMS Leith documented smoke plumes visible across the horizon, indicating multiple sinkings. Survivors were frequently left in lifeboats amid ice floes and freezing waters. The convoy suffered losses of 24 merchant vessels, over 210 lives, and 122,000 tons of cargo, representing one of the greatest material losses in the Arctic convoy series. Notably, Tirpitz and supporting German surface units never directly engaged PQ-17. The decision to scatter the convoy, made by the Admiralty based on incomplete intelligence, was the primary factor in the disaster. Post-event analyses by Admiral Tovey and Captain Broom criticized the remote command structure, citing the lack of on-scene judgment and over-reliance on ambiguous Enigma intercepts. Churchill later described PQ-17 as one of the most melancholy naval episodes of the entire war. Despite the disaster, Arctic convoys continued. Subsequent operations incorporated lessons from PQ-17, closer escort coordination, improved anti-aircraft coverage, and revised response protocols to intelligence regarding German surface units. Between 1941 and 1945, the Arctic convoy system successfully delivered over 4 million tons of war material, sustaining the Soviet war effort, though at the cost of more than 100 ships and 3,000 lives. PQ-17 remained the benchmark for operational caution, intelligence interpretation, and the perilous nature of Arctic maritime logistics. By the evening of July 5, 1942, PQ-17 had fully scattered across the Barents Sea. Commodore John Dowding, following Admiralty orders, maintained minimal coordination between the dispersed merchantmen, yet the convoy's cohesion was irrevocably broken. Reports from the surviving escorts indicate that some ships attempted to maintain visual contact, but the vast expanse of the Arctic and the clear summer skies made concealment impossible. The close escort, commanded by Captain Jack Broom, had been reduced to isolated defensive actions, with the destroyer screen spread thin across hundreds of miles. British Admiralty communications, preserved in the Public Record Office, ADM 199 series, reveal that at 14:23 Greenwich Mean Time, a signal from the Admiralty to Dowding instructed all merchant ships to proceed independently, escorts to the westward to intercept threat. Repeat, scatter. This directive, taken literally by all units, left the convoy's ships vulnerable to coordinated Luftwaffe and U-boat attacks. Archival Kriegsmarine War diaries, particularly those of U-88, U-251, and U-457, confirmed that German submarines were given explicit orders to concentrate on the scattered ships, identifying targets via aerial reconnaissance and interboat communication. Logs indicate that U-251 fired torpedoes at SS Empire Stephen, causing an immediate sinking, while U-457 reported visual confirmation of SS Daniel Morgan in flames at 16:47 Greenwich Mean Time. Simultaneously, Luftwaffe 5 launched a sequence of torpedo bomber operations, utilizing Heinkel He-111s modified for Arctic conditions. Aircraft took advantage of clear visibility and minimal cloud cover to strike isolated vessels. The SS John Witherspoon, carrying tanks and ammunition, was attacked at 18:15 Greenwich Mean Time, sustaining multiple torpedo hits. Survivors noted that anti-aircraft fire was largely ineffective. The ship's limited 20mm Oerlikon cannons could not match coordinated air attacks. Documents in the Imperial War Museum archive confirm that only 2 aircraft were downed during these operations, emphasizing the overwhelming advantage of German aerial coordination in dispersed conditions. On July 6, 1942, the remaining escorts attempted to regroup and provide protective sweeps, yet Admiralty instructions prohibited any deviation from the scatter command. Captain Broom, aboard HMS Keppel, sent repeated messages indicating that merchant vessels were in mortal danger. At 9:32 Greenwich Mean Time, Broom reported, "Multiple merchant ships under attack, significant losses occurring, request permission to consolidate defense." No further orders from London countermanded the previous directive. The scattered ships continued independently toward Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, exposing them to repeated air and submarine attacks. The German Admiral Stab issued coded messages to U-boat flotillas, emphasizing the opportunity to eliminate high-value cargo critical for the Soviet war effort. Kriegstagebuch entries, KTBs, document multiple sightings. SS River Afton was torpedoed by U-88 at 11:05 Greenwich Mean Time, followed by SS Bellingham at 12:47 Greenwich Mean Time, with survivors rescued by lifeboats days later under extreme Arctic conditions. Meteorological reports indicate that temperatures during early July in the Barents Sea ranged from -2°C to 4°C, with significant ice floes drifting southward. These conditions amplified the peril for sailors abandoned in lifeboats or adrift after torpedo attacks. Royal Navy logs confirm that of the original 35 merchantmen, 24 were sunk, 210 crew members perished, and over 122,000 tons of essential cargo were lost. Aircraft and tank shipments, vital to the Soviet Army, were completely destroyed in some instances. Throughout this period, the German surface fleet remained largely inactive. Tirpitz, Admiral Hipper, and Admiral Scheer remained in the Alta Fjord, conducting reconnaissance but never engaging. Kriegsmarine orders, now declassified in the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv, indicate internal confusion. Conflicting orders from Befehlshaber der Kriegsmarine led to hesitancy in committing the heavy ships to open engagement. Nevertheless, the mere threat of their presence had triggered the fatal Admiralty decision to scatter the convoy. By July 7, survivors of attacks were often forced to navigate ice-choked waters in lifeboats for several days before rescue. Soviet naval records document the coordinated search efforts undertaken by KM-12 and KM-14 patrol vessels, rescuing fragmented groups of survivors from merchant ships such as SS Ocean Voice and SS Empire Howard. Rescue efforts were complicated by ice floes, poor visibility, and the constant threat of German U-boats. Several lifeboats were never recovered, and exact casualty counts remain uncertain due to incomplete logs. The aftermath of PQ-17 provoked intense review and criticism within the Royal Navy. Admiral Sir John Tovey, in his personal diary, ADM 116/2045, lamented the Admiralty's reliance on remote intelligence. The Admiralty, distant and removed from observation, misinterpreted partial intelligence, resulting in the dispersion of a defensible convoy. The cost has been grievous. Captain Jack Broom later recounted in his memoirs that the order to scatter was received as a death sentence for merchantmen. Historians examining these archives note that the combination of Arctic conditions, scattered formations, and enemy coordination constituted a perfect storm, a case where human decision-making under uncertain intelligence had catastrophic consequences. Subsequent Arctic convoys incorporated rigorous operational lessons from PQ-17. Tighter escort formations, improved anti-aircraft defenses, and centralized command coordination were emphasized. British Admiralty reports post-July 1942 mandated that any future scatter commands be authorized only under direct confirmation from commanders at sea. PQ-17, therefore, became both a cautionary tale and a template for operational reforms in Arctic convoy strategy. By the end of July 1942, only 11 of the 35 original ships reached the ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. Losses of critical war material, including tanks and aircraft, delayed Soviet frontline operations in key sectors but underscored the strategic value of continued Allied supply. Subsequent convoys were scheduled with more robust escort coverage and improved aerial reconnaissance to prevent a repetition of PQ-17's tragedy. The final analysis, incorporating British Admiralty data, Kriegsmarine operational reports, and Soviet naval archives, concludes that PQ-17's disaster was not a result of superior enemy capability alone. It was primarily a consequence of misinterpreted intelligence, rigid adherence to distant commands, and the harsh realities of Arctic navigation. The convoy's story remains a singular example of the perils faced by Allied logistics in the Northern Theater and a solemn reminder of the human cost of strategic miscalculation. By July 8, 1942, the remnants of Convoy PQ-17 were scattered across hundreds of nautical miles of the Barents Sea, with merchantmen isolated and under constant threat. Archival Admiralty logs, ADM 199/4, indicate that Commodore John Dowding attempted to maintain minimal reporting between surviving vessels, though the sheer distances and harsh weather conditions severely limited effective communication. Many ships relied on visual signaling or short-range wireless transmissions, which were vulnerable to interception by German forces. The SS River Afton, carrying 50 Sherman tanks and ammunition, was struck by torpedoes from U-251 at 11:05 Greenwich Mean Time on July 8. The ship exploded after a secondary detonation in the ammunition hold, killing 18 crew members instantly. Survivors abandoned lifeboats and improvised rafts, navigating ice-laden waters for over 48 hours before Soviet patrol vessels KM-12 and KM-14 located and rescued the crew. These rescue operations, documented in Soviet naval reports, highlight the extraordinary coordination required under extreme conditions, combining ice navigation with search and rescue in near-zero temperatures. On the same day, SS John Witherspoon, carrying aviation fuel and crates of anti-tank weapons, was torpedoed by U-88 at 15:22 Greenwich Mean Time. The explosion created a firestorm, and oil-slicked waters hampered lifeboat deployment. Survivors reported witnessing multiple merchantmen sinking within hours, indicating the relentless effectiveness of U-boat coordination with Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft. Logs from Kampfgeschwader 30 confirmed that Ju-88s conducted follow-up torpedo attacks throughout the afternoon, systematically targeting vessels visible in the ice floes. Meanwhile, HMS Leith, serving as part of the close escort, reported that the heavy cruiser covering force, including HMS London and HMS Norfolk, had already withdrawn westward in accordance with Admiralty orders. The disconnect between distant command and on-scene reality left the merchantmen effectively defenseless. Admiralty files, ADM 1/4168, show repeated requests from Captain Broom for permission to reassemble scattered ships or return to the convoy route, all of which were denied. The prevailing doctrine emphasized obedience to remote command decisions over situational judgment. The German surface fleet, although present in Norwegian fjords, did not engage directly. The Tirpitz, Admiral Hipper, and Admiral Scheer conducted reconnaissance sorties but returned to port without firing a shot. Kriegsmarine operational orders, preserved in the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv, BArchMARM 33 halves, reflect conflicting instructions between Befehlshaber der Kriegsmarine and the 8th U-boat flotilla. While the flotilla was encouraged to attack the convoy, surface engagement was deferred due to uncertainties in Luftwaffe coordination and risk assessment. Throughout July 9, 1942, scattered merchant vessels continued to be targeted by German aircraft and U-boats. The SS Empire Howard, loaded with aluminum and spare aircraft engines, was hit at 10:45 Greenwich Mean Time by torpedoes from U-457. Subsequent reports from the Imperial War Museum archives indicate that the crew abandoned the vessel under freezing conditions, with only half reaching rescue ships. Observations by U-boat commanders noted the near-total destruction of cargo, underscoring the strategic impact on Soviet supply lines. On July 10, surviving vessels that had evaded immediate attacks approached the relative safety of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. SS Ocean Voice and SS Empire Byron reached port under skeletal anti-aircraft fire, having lost most of their cargo due to previous attacks or jettisoning to lighten the ship for maneuvering. Soviet port records show that unloading was delayed due to damage sustained by vessels and the extreme volume of survivors requiring medical attention. Between June 27 and July 10, the Convoy had lost 24 ships, over 210 lives, and critical supplies essential to the Red Army. The cumulative analysis of PQ-17, based on Admiralty and Kriegsmarine archival material, reveals that the disaster resulted primarily from misinterpretation of intelligence and rigid command protocols. Enigma intercepts suggested movement of Tirpitz but failed to confirm engagement. The Admiralty's decision to scatter the convoy, transmitted thousands of miles away from the Barents Sea, illustrates the challenges inherent in long-distance command over dispersed maritime units. The juxtaposition of Arctic environmental hazards, extended daylight visibility, and effective German coordination created conditions that no single escort or merchantman could survive in isolation. Post-event reports, including Tovey's memorandum, ADM 116/2045, and Broom's personal recollections, emphasize the consequences of such strategic misjudgments. Churchill's war diaries further reflect the gravity of the loss, noting that PQ-17 had been one of the most tragic naval operations of the conflict, yet it imparted invaluable lessons for subsequent convoy procedures. Following PQ-17, the Royal Navy implemented tighter convoy cohesion, enhanced anti-aircraft coverage, and mandatory in-theater decision authority for commanders, reducing the risk of future misinterpretations. The Arctic convoy system endured through the remainder of the war. Between 1941 and 1945, 78 convoys delivered over 4 million tons of material, at a cost of more than 100 vessels and approximately 3,000 lives. PQ-17 remained a case study in operational risk management, the limitations of intelligence interpretation, and the human cost of distant command. Its lessons informed subsequent Allied strategies, ensuring the continued supply of the Soviet Union and contributing to the eventual collapse of the German Eastern Front. The final surviving records indicate that the wrecks of PQ-17 vessels, such as SS Bolton Castle, SS Empire Howard, and SS Bellingham, remain submerged in the Barents Sea. These sites, largely undisturbed, serve as solemn maritime graves, a reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices endured by the Arctic convoy sailors and the unforgiving environment they confronted. By July 11, 1942, the Arctic waters surrounding the Kola Peninsula remained fraught with danger. Survivors of the scattered PQ-17 convoy were gradually making their way to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, but the losses endured during the previous 2 weeks highlighted the extreme vulnerability of independent merchant ships. Soviet naval records indicate that search and rescue operations continued for vessels and lifeboats, with Arctic patrol boats such as KM-14 and KM-22 recovering isolated crews from ice-choked seas. These operations were coordinated with Red Army detachments along the northern ports, ensuring medical treatment for hypothermia and frostbite, which affected nearly all rescued sailors. On July 11, the U-boat flotilla assigned to PQ-17's interception, primarily U-251, U-457, and U-88, received coded directives from Befehlshaber U-boot to maintain pressure on the scattered vessels. Kriegstagebuch entries note torpedo salvos at coordinates approximating 73 degrees 10' N, 35 degrees 45' E, confirming that German submarines utilized both visual contact and aerial reconnaissance from Heinkel E-111s for targeting. The successful engagement of SS Empire Byron at 9:50 Greenwich Mean Time exemplified the lethal synergy of combined arms. Torpedo strikes incapacitated the ship, while low-flying aircraft prevented effective lifeboat deployment. Concurrently, the remaining escorts attempted to establish temporary protective perimeters around isolated groups of merchantmen. The HMS Keppel, under Captain Jack Broom, was directed to cover a cluster of 5 ships attempting to reach Murmansk. Archival logs show that between 8 o'clock and 1800 hours Greenwich Mean Time, repeated attacks by Luftwaffe aircraft occurred. Notably, SS Christopher Newport, previously damaged, was further strafed, forcing the abandonment of the vessel. The logs of HMS Keppel detail anti-aircraft engagements, including the use of 4-inch MKV dual-purpose guns and 20mm Oerlikon cannons, which, while inflicting minor aircraft losses, were insufficient to deter concentrated attacks. The Admiralty, in London, continued to monitor PQ-17 via encrypted transmissions intercepted and decrypted through Enigma intelligence. Reports at 13:15 Greenwich Mean Time on July 11 indicated that 6 merchant ships had been destroyed, with another 4 critically damaged. However, These communications did not reflect the full scope of destruction. The Arctic's extended daylight and scattered formation caused observational gaps, resulting in delayed recognition of losses. Consequently, rescue orders and reassignment of naval assets were reactive rather than proactive. By July 12, it was evident that the strategic goal of the convoy, to deliver essential war material to the Soviet Union, had been severely compromised. Losses included 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, and over 122,000 tons of critical supplies. The surviving vessels, including SS Ocean Voice and SS Empire Howard, were forced to prioritize speed over cargo integrity, often jettisoning supplies to navigate shallow channels or ice-clogged waters. Soviet port authorities recorded partial loss of cargo upon arrival, affecting subsequent deployment to frontline units. Technical assessments of the convoy's escort capabilities post-PQ-17 highlight several systemic vulnerabilities. Flower-class corvettes, while effective in anti-submarine operations under normal circumstances, lacked the range and speed to respond to dispersed attacks over hundreds of nautical miles. Destroyers, although equipped with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges, were constrained by operational orders that prohibited engagement with German surface forces. The limited anti-aircraft armament on both escorts and merchantmen proved inadequate against coordinated Luftwaffe strikes, which employed torpedo bombers and low-level strafing runs. Archival Kriegsmarine documents provide additional insight into German strategy. The operational code for PQ-17 interception, labeled Befehl 33, directed flotillas to attack scattered enemy transports with priority on high-value material. U-boat commanders were instructed to patrol designated sectors, utilize intelligence from aerial reconnaissance, and report all sightings. U-457 logged successful engagements with SS Empire Byron and SS Bellingham, noting both cargo destruction and crew evacuation in their KTB entries. Luftwaffe Kampfgeschwader 30 and 26 provided visual confirmation of sinkings, coordinating with submarines through prearranged signal protocols. On July 13, reports indicated that the final merchant vessels from PQ-17 were reaching Murmansk under minimal escort. SS River Afton, despite sustaining significant structural damage, navigated ice floes successfully due to its reinforced hull. Naval engineers later noted that the ship's triple-bottom construction, designed for North Atlantic convoys, allowed it to survive torpedo impacts that would have otherwise sunk standard hulls. The cumulative operational report submitted by Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton highlighted the critical errors in command. While acknowledging the bravery and skill of convoy commanders and sailors, the report emphasized that remote admiralty directives, based on incomplete intelligence, created conditions in which survival depended on chance. Recommendations included enhanced in-theater decision authority, integration of real-time reconnaissance data, and the pre-deployment of additional escort units capable of independent operation in Arctic conditions. The human cost of PQ-17 was considerable. Of the 1,200 merchant seamen and 300 naval personnel initially assigned to the convoy, over 210 were killed, and hundreds more suffered exposure and frostbite. Survivor testimonies, preserved in Imperial War Museum oral history collections, describe prolonged periods in lifeboats amid freezing waters, with ice accumulation on clothing and life rafts posing constant risk of hypothermia. Soviet naval logs corroborate these accounts, documenting the arduous rescue operations carried out by small patrol vessels under hazardous conditions. From a strategic perspective, PQ-17 underscored the vulnerability of Allied Arctic supply lines. While the convoy's disaster delayed delivery of essential material, it did not halt Soviet operations, thanks to subsequent convoys that incorporated enhanced defensive measures. Arctic convoy procedures were revised to maintain tighter formations, employ continuous aerial reconnaissance, and provide robust anti-aircraft coverage, lessons learned directly from PQ-17's losses. By mid-July 1942, the full scope of the convoy's fate became clear. Analysis of the archival records, including British Admiralty operational reports, Kriegsmarine war diaries, and Soviet naval port records, confirms that PQ-17's failure resulted from a combination of misinterpreted intelligence, rigid adherence to Admiralty orders, and the relentless Arctic environment. Historians today cite PQ-17 as a case study in operational risk management, demonstrating how communication delays and fragmented decision-making can produce catastrophic outcomes, even when facing an enemy that never deployed its full surface fleet. By July 14, 1942, the full accounting of Convoy PQ-17 began to take shape. Archival reports from the Royal Navy, the Public Record Office, ADM 199/4, and the Imperial War Museum compiled detailed summaries of losses, survivor rescues, and operational failures. Among the merchant vessels lost were SS Daniel Morgan, SS Empire Byron, SS John Witherspoon, SS Christopher Newport, and SS Bellingham, each carrying critical war material including tanks, aircraft components, ammunition, and food supplies. The cumulative cargo lost represented a significant portion of Allied support to the Soviet war effort for mid-1942. Technical assessments of these vessels reveal vulnerabilities accentuated by the Arctic environment. The Empire-class cargo ships, despite reinforced hulls, were not designed to withstand coordinated torpedo and aerial attacks while isolated. Flower-class corvettes and destroyers, although equipped with depth charges, Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, and anti-aircraft guns, could not effectively provide coverage over the expanded area created by the Admiralty's scatter order. Escort coordination was further hampered by the distance from the home fleet's distant covering force, which, under Admiral Sir John Tovey, had withdrawn to prevent engagement with perceived German surface threats. Kriegsmarine U-Boat War Diaries, KTBs, for U-251, U-457, U-88, and U-254 detail a relentless campaign. U-251 recorded sinking SS River Afton on July 8 at 73 degrees 10' N, 35 degrees 45' E, noting lifeboats deployed and some survivors lost to exposure. U-457 reported the destruction of SS Empire Byron, confirming cargo obliteration. U-88 documented attacks on SS John Witherspoon, highlighting coordinated Luftwaffe support that enabled precise targeting despite Arctic fog and ice conditions. Luftwaffe 5 reconnaissance flights provided continuous visual updates to U-boat command, maximizing attack effectiveness. Archival Admiralty communications during 14 to 16 July demonstrate attempts to track scattered vessels and coordinate rescues. Commodore Dowding and Captain Broom sent repeated signals requesting permission to regroup survivors or deploy available escorts to isolated ships. At 15:32 Greenwich Mean Time on July 15, Broom transmitted, "Multiple merchantmen adrift, anti-aircraft support inadequate. Request authorization to consolidate rescue operations." No reversal of the scatter order was authorized, leaving crews at the mercy of Arctic conditions and enemy action. By July 16, survivors reached Murmansk and Arkhangelsk under challenging conditions. Soviet naval records report that KM-12, KM-14, and KM-22 conducted coordinated rescue operations, retrieving crews from lifeboats and ice floes. Hypothermia, frostbite, and trauma were widespread. Hospital reports from Murmansk document over 150 cases of severe cold exposure among surviving sailors. Only 11 of the original 35 merchant ships arrived safely, most severely damaged or partially unloaded. Subsequent operational reviews emphasized critical failings. The Admiralty's reliance on intelligence suggesting Tirpitz's sortie, combined with the rigid adherence to scatter orders, was identified as the primary cause of the disaster. Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton, in his post-convoy report, noted, "The lack of on-scene discretion, coupled with incomplete intelligence, created conditions that rendered the convoy indefensible. The Arctic environment compounded human and operational limitations." Analysis of Luftwaffe operations during the PQ-17 period indicates remarkable coordination. Kampfgeschwader 30 and 26 conducted multiple sorties using Heinkel He-111 and Junkers Ju-88 aircraft. They implemented attack patterns optimized for dispersed ships, combining torpedo strikes with low-level strafing. Only 2 Allied aircraft were downed, underscoring the limited defensive capability of scattered convoys. Technical specifications of lost and surviving ships reveal strategic implications. Merchant vessels carried 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, and 4,246 motor vehicles, with losses directly affecting Red Army operations in mid-1942. Anti-aircraft armament on merchant ships included 20mm Oerlikon cannons, which, though effective against individual aircraft, could not defend against multiple simultaneous attacks coordinated with submarine strikes. Flower-class corvettes and destroyers, equipped with Hedgehog mortars, 4-inch dual-purpose guns, and depth charges, were dispersed, reducing collective effectiveness. By the end of July 16, the full operational picture emerged. The British Admiralty estimated total cargo losses at 122,000 tons, with merchant losses of 24 ships and over 210 lives. The Arctic convoy system, while eventually successful in sustaining Soviet logistics, was forced to reassess its protocols. PQ-17 became a seminal case study in naval operations, intelligence interpretation, and risk management in extreme environments. Subsequent convoys implemented improved strategies, tighter escort formations, better integration of aerial reconnaissance, enhanced anti-aircraft coverage, and decentralization of command for on-scene decision-making. These measures, informed directly by PQ-17's losses, contributed to the eventual success of the Arctic supply line, delivering over 4 million tons of material by the end of 1945, despite continued enemy action and harsh environmental conditions. The final evaluation of PQ-17 illustrates the interplay of intelligence, command decisions, environmental hazards, and enemy coordination. While the German surface fleet never directly engaged the convoy, the perceived threat alone dictated strategic choices with catastrophic consequences. Archival documents confirm that misinterpretation of Enigma intercepts, combined with rigid Admiralty directives, resulted in a preventable loss of life and material. The Arctic environment, with its ice flows, extreme temperatures, and extended daylight, magnified these operational challenges. Today, the wrecks of PQ-17 vessels remain largely undisturbed beneath the Barents Sea. Sites such as SS Bolton Castle, SS Empire Howard, and SS Bellingham serve as maritime graves, preserved in near-freezing waters. These wrecks, alongside archival records from the Royal Navy, Soviet Navy, and Kriegsmarine, provide historians and maritime archaeologists with tangible evidence of the human and material costs of Arctic convoy operations. PQ-17 remains a defining example of the intersection between intelligence, command decision-making, and environmental hazards in naval history. By July 17, 1942, the Arctic theater surrounding the Kola Peninsula had settled into relative quiet, yet the operational consequences of PQ-17's disaster were still unfolding. Detailed logs from surviving merchant vessels indicate that sailors were recovering from exposure and exhaustion, many having spent multiple days adrift in sub-zero temperatures. SS Ocean Voice, arriving at Murmansk on July 17, reported that ice had adhered to its hull and superstructure, complicating docking procedures. Soviet naval personnel documented that the unloading of cargo, including machinery and ammunition, required additional labor due to structural damage sustained during attacks. The Royal Navy conducted an internal assessment, referencing ADM 199/4 and ADM 1/4168, noting that the failure to maintain convoy cohesion had been the decisive factor in losses. Captain Jack Broom, commanding HMS Keppel, submitted a comprehensive operational report on July 17. With convoy dispersed, individual merchantmen faced overwhelming air and submarine attack. The destroyer screen was insufficient to prevent losses. Arctic conditions exacerbated casualties and hampered coordination. Kriegsmarine documentation confirms that U-boat commanders continued to report encounters with stragglers until July 18. U-88 logged the sinking of SS Bellingham on July 17 at 73 degrees 20' N, 36 degrees 10' E, noting that survivors were collected by lifeboats days later. U-457 reported observation of multiple merchantmen, including SS Empire Byron, adrift and abandoned. Luftwaffe reconnaissance, primarily Heinkel He 111 sorties from Luftwaffe, provided visual confirmation and enabled precise targeting by submarines, illustrating the lethality of coordinated Axis operations even in the absence of surface fleet engagement. On July 18, Admiralty communications reflected urgent attempts to locate and assist remaining survivors. Encrypted signals sent to Murmansk port authorities detailed coordinates for rescue operations and requests for Soviet naval patrol support. Soviet records from KM-12, KM-14, and KM-22 indicate that combined search and rescue efforts recovered over 120 seamen from lifeboats and ice floes, many suffering from hypothermia, frostbite, and malnutrition. Medical logs reveal that mortality continued among survivors, with delayed treatment exacerbating exposure injuries. The technical analysis of the convoy's losses highlights structural and defensive inadequacies. Merchant vessels, including Empire-class and Liberty ships, were equipped with limited anti-aircraft defense, primarily 20mm Oerlikon cannons and a few 3-inch/50 caliber guns. These armaments were ineffective against coordinated Luftwaffe torpedo strikes. Escorts, such as Flower-class corvettes and destroyers, were spread across hundreds of nautical miles, their Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges unable to protect multiple dispersed ships simultaneously. The scatter order therefore nullified the tactical advantages of the convoy's escort design. Archival Admiralty correspondence from July 19 underscores the long-term operational lessons derived from PQ-17. Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton emphasized, future Arctic convoys must maintain cohesive formations, with authority vested in on-scene commanders to respond to evolving threats. Intelligence must be corroborated and evaluated in context. Misinterpretation cannot dictate operational orders that endanger lives. By July 20, surviving vessels had arrived at Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. Only 11 of 35 merchantmen completed the voyage intact, many with partial or completely destroyed cargo. Losses included 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 vehicles, and essential supplies for Soviet military operations. These material losses delayed Soviet resupply efforts in key sectors, but subsequent convoys, benefiting from the lessons of PQ-17, mitigated strategic impact. The human cost remained significant. Of the initial 1,200 merchant seamen and 300 naval personnel, over 210 were killed, with hundreds more suffering long-term injuries. Survivor testimonies collected in Imperial War Museum oral history archives describe enduring Arctic exposure for days, navigating lifeboats and rafts amid floating ice, and witnessing multiple vessels explode under torpedo and aerial attack. These first-hand accounts corroborate naval logs, emphasizing the severe human and operational consequences of command decisions made thousands of miles away from the theater. Strategic Analysis Post PQ-17 demonstrates that while the convoy's failure stemmed largely from misinterpreted intelligence and rigid adherence to Admiralty directives, environmental and operational factors magnified the losses. Arctic conditions, ice floes, extended daylight, freezing temperatures, combined with dispersed formations, rendered merchantmen extraordinarily vulnerable. U-boat commanders and Luftwaffe units exploited this vulnerability, achieving maximum effect with minimal direct engagement from German surface forces. Subsequent Arctic convoys, such as PQ-18 and JW-51B, incorporated procedural reforms, tighter formations, centralized on-scene command, improved anti-aircraft and anti-submarine defenses, and integration of continuous aerial reconnaissance. The PQ-17 disaster directly influenced these changes, underscoring the importance of adaptability in high-risk operational theaters. By the end of July 1942, the Arctic convoy system had adapted to mitigate vulnerabilities exposed by PQ-17. Lessons learned informed both tactical and strategic decisions for the remainder of the war. PQ-17's legacy remained as a case study in operational risk, intelligence interpretation, and human endurance under extreme conditions. The wrecks of lost vessels, preserved in the Barents Sea, continue to provide historical and archaeological evidence, serving as solemn reminders of the peril faced by sailors in the Northern Theater. By July 21, 1942, comprehensive reports on convoy PQ-17's surviving vessels were being compiled. The Royal Navy, referencing ADM 199/4 and ADM 1/4168, undertook detailed assessments of the remaining merchantmen and their condition. SS Ocean Voice, SS Empire Howard, and SS River Afton had arrived at Murmansk with significant hull damage, ice accumulation, and partial cargo loss. Technical inspections revealed that SS River Afton's triple-bottom reinforced hull had absorbed torpedo damage from U-251, preventing total sinking, demonstrating the resilience of Arctic-hardened merchant designs. Archival Kriegsmarine records for U-457, U-88, and U-251 provide insight into the final engagements of straggling ships. U-457's KTB entry for July 21 notes: spotted damaged merchant at 73 degrees 25 foot N, 36 degrees 40 E, fired torpedo, vessel abandoned. Lifeboats observed, survivors later retrieved by Soviet patrols. U-88 documented similar engagements with SS Bellingham and SS Christopher Newport, confirming coordinated Luftwaffe reconnaissance that allowed precise submarine attacks despite Arctic fog and ice. Luftwaffe's Heinkel He-111 sorties provided real-time visual updates, highlighting the integration of air and submarine operations. Soviet naval patrols, notably KM-12, KM-14, and KM-22, conducted continuous rescue operations between 21 to 23 July. Hospital logs in Murmansk indicate that 120 to 150 seamen were treated for hypothermia, frostbite, and trauma. Medical staff recorded multiple fatalities due to prolonged exposure during rescue, illustrating the extreme human cost beyond combat losses. Technical assessments of convoy escort ships reveal limitations exacerbated by dispersion. Flower-class corvettes, while effective in anti-submarine warfare, lack sufficient speed and armament to defend isolated vessels. Destroyers, equipped with 4-inch MKV dual-purpose guns, 20mm Oerlikon cannons, and Hedgehog mortars, were dispersed over hundreds of nautical miles, nullifying their collective effectiveness. Merchant ships, armed primarily with 20mm Oerlikons and a few 3-inch guns, were virtually defenseless against combined U-boat and Luftwaffe attacks. Admiralty communications from July 22 highlight the operational lessons drawn from PQ-17. Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton emphasized: command decisions made remotely, without full situational awareness, produced catastrophic losses. Future convoys must employ flexible, on-scene command structures to mitigate intelligence uncertainties and environmental hazards. By July 23, all surviving ships had reached Murmansk or Arkhangelsk. Cargo losses were quantified at over 122,000 tons, including 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, and 4,246 vehicles, critical to Soviet operational capabilities. The disruption delayed Red Army deployments, but subsequent Arctic convoys incorporated PQ-17 lessons, reducing vulnerability and improving delivery reliability. The human toll remained profound. Of the initial 1,200 merchant seamen and 300 naval personnel, over 210 perished, and hundreds more sustained long-term injuries from exposure. Survivor testimonies, preserved in Imperial War Museum oral histories, describe extreme conditions, multiple days adrift, and the psychological impact of witnessing the destruction of nearby vessels. These accounts, corroborated by Soviet naval logs, emphasize the compounded dangers of Arctic navigation, enemy action, and environmental hazards. Strategically, PQ-17 demonstrated the limitations of long-distance command in complex operational theaters. Intelligence misinterpretation, primarily the perceived threat from Tirpitz, led to the scatter order, which rendered convoy defenses ineffective. German U-boat and Luftwaffe coordination exploited this vulnerability, achieving maximum material destruction without engaging the surface fleet. Post-convoy evaluations led to immediate procedural reforms. Convoys PQ-18 and JW-51B implemented tighter formations, enhanced anti-aircraft and anti-submarine coverage, and decentralized decision-making authority for convoy commanders. These reforms, directly informed by PQ-17, enabled the Arctic convoy system to successfully deliver over 4 million tons of material to the Soviet Union by 1945, despite continued enemy attacks and harsh environmental conditions. Finally, the wrecks of PQ-17 vessels, such as SS Bolton Castle, SS Empire Howard, and SS Bellingham, remain preserved under the Barents Sea. These maritime graves provide tangible evidence of the human and material costs of Arctic convoy operations. Archival documentation from the Royal Navy, Soviet Navy, and Kriegsmarine ensures that historians can accurately reconstruct PQ-17's events, providing a lasting study of operational risk, command decision-making, and human endurance in one of the most unforgiving naval theaters of World War II. By July 24, 1942, the Arctic convoy disaster of PQ-17 had fully revealed the scale of losses and the operational shortcomings that contributed to the tragedy. The Admiralty, reviewing logs from HMS Keppel, HMS Onslow, and surviving Flower-class corvettes, confirmed that only 11 out of 35 merchant ships reached Soviet ports intact. Archival correspondence emphasized the systemic failure created by the scatter order, which, while intended to mitigate the perceived threat of the German Tirpitz, inadvertently exposed individual vessels to concentrated U-boat and Luftwaffe attacks. A detailed breakdown of surviving ships highlights both resilience and vulnerability. SS River Afton, with its triple-bottom hull, withstood torpedo impacts that would have sunk standard cargo ships. SS Ocean Voice, despite severe hull damage, managed to reach Murmansk, but at the cost of jettisoned cargo and extensive crew fatigue. Each vessel's arrival was meticulously logged by Soviet port authorities, noting not only cargo delivery but also the physical and medical condition of the crew, which underscored the extreme environmental and operational stresses endured during the voyage. Kriegsmarine KTBs from U-251, U-457, U-88, and U-254 document the tactical approach used against PQ-17. Submarine commanders utilized intelligence from Luftwaffe 5 reconnaissance flights to identify isolated vessels and execute torpedo attacks at optimal range. U-251 reported engagement with SS Empire Byron on July 8 at 73 degrees 10' N, 35 degrees 45' E, detailing torpedo strikes, observed lifeboat deployment, and the subsequent drift of survivors. Luftwaffe aircrew corroborated these observations, confirming destruction of cargo and hull integrity. These records illustrate the coordination between German naval and aerial units, demonstrating that effective results were achieved without deploying the Kriegsmarine's surface fleet. Analysis of operational communications reveals the critical role of intelligence misinterpretation. Enigma intercepts, decrypted at Bletchley Park, suggested a potential sortie by Tirpitz. The Admiralty, acting on this intelligence, issued the scatter order to PQ-17, inadvertently increasing vulnerability. Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton's post-action report emphasized the dangers of remote command without situational awareness. Decisions made without full observation created conditions in which survival depended more on chance and environmental fortitude than on tactical skill or courage. Human cost remained starkly evident. Of the 1,200 merchant seamen and 300 naval personnel, over 210 died, with hundreds more suffering exposure-related injuries. Survivor testimony, preserved in Imperial War Museum oral histories, recounts days adrift in lifeboats, ice accumulation, hypothermia, and psychological trauma from witnessing nearby vessels sink under torpedo and aerial attack. Soviet rescue operations, particularly by KM-12, KM-14, and KM-22, mitigated further loss of life but could not fully compensate for the consequences of the scatter order and concentrated enemy action. Technical evaluations of PQ-17 reinforced the lessons learned. Flower-class corvettes and destroyers, though equipped with 4-inch MKV dual-purpose guns, 20mm Oerlikon cannons, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, could not provide effective coverage over dispersed formations. Merchant ships, armed primarily with 20mm Oerlikon and a few 3-inch guns, were insufficiently protected against coordinated Luftwaffe torpedo strikes. Post-PQ-17 convoy protocols emphasized formation cohesion, enhanced anti-aircraft coverage, and decentralized on-scene command authority to mitigate similar operational risks. Strategic consequences for the Allies were significant. PQ-17's losses delayed delivery of 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, and 4,246 vehicles, critical for Soviet operations. However, subsequent convoys, such as PQ-18 and JW-51B, incorporated lessons from PQ-17, achieving greater delivery reliability and reducing vulnerability. Arctic convoy operations, informed by PQ-17, became a cornerstone of Allied support to the Soviet Union, ultimately enabling the delivery of over 4 million tons of war material by 1945 despite continued enemy attacks. From the German perspective, PQ-17 demonstrated the efficacy of coordinated submarine and aerial operations without committing surface units. Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe records confirm that intelligence-guided attacks achieved maximum effect, with limited losses to personnel or equipment. The German High Command regarded PQ-17 as operationally successful, highlighting the strategic advantage of exploiting enemy misinterpretation of intelligence combined with environmental factors. Maritime archaeology and historical preservation efforts provide contemporary insight. Wrecks such as SS Bolton Castle, SS Empire Howard, and SS Bellingham remain in the Barents Sea, largely intact due to cold water preservation. These sites, along with surviving naval logs and survivor accounts, allow historians to reconstruct the convoy's events with unprecedented accuracy. They serve as tangible evidence of both human courage and the devastating consequences of command decisions compounded by environmental hazards. In conclusion, Convoy PQ-17 remains an enduring case study in naval operations, intelligence interpretation, and human endurance. Its legacy underscores the critical importance of situational awareness, adaptive command structures, and realistic operational planning in complex theaters. The Arctic environment, the coordinated actions of the enemy, and the rigidity of Admiralty directives combined to produce one of the most catastrophic convoy disasters of World War II. The lessons learned informed subsequent convoy operations, contributing to the eventual success of Allied Arctic supply lines and shaping the strategic conduct of maritime warfare.